Picture this. You're stepping out of a tiny, cramped tent. But you're not stepping onto a soft lawn or a warm beach. You're stepping directly into the dead of a pitch-black, freezing Siberian night. And as you look down, you realize something absolutely terrifying. You are completely barefoot.
And honestly, it gets worse. You don't have a coat on either. For some reason, you've just willingly abandoned your heavy jackets, your gloves, basically all your essential survival gear, right in the middle of one of the most hostile, unforgiving environments on Earth.
You're plunging into temperatures that are sitting well below negative 30 degrees Celsius. The stakes? Instantly lethal. Days later, your bodies will be found scattered across that frozen mountain. Some of you will have succumbed to the cold, sure, but others will show signs of violent, completely inexplicable trauma. And the craziest part? There won't be a single sign of anyone else around. No obvious explanation whatsoever.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer on what is absolutely one of history's greatest, most baffling unsolved puzzles, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Even now, over 65 years later, the sheer physical evidence left behind by these 9 hikers continues to stump investigators and scientists everywhere. Today, we're going to walk through the timeline, dig into the actual forensic evidence, and lay out the major theories. We're sticking strictly to the established facts to try and wrap our heads around what exactly happened the night 9 people vanished into the dark.
Section 1. The Doomed Expedition.
Now, to really grasp the absolute madness of that freezing night, we kind of have to establish the calm before the storm. Let's roll the clock back to January of 1959 and look at who was actually up on that mountain. We're tracking a group of 9 Soviet hikers, led by a guy named Igor Dyatlov. They were setting out on a massive skiing expedition across the northern Ural Mountains. So the crucial point is this: these guys were not amateurs. They were young, healthy, highly trained survivalists. In fact, their entire goal for this trip was to earn the highest possible hiking certification available in the Soviet Union at the time. You just don't attempt a trek like this unless you know exactly how to survive extreme cold. Which is exactly what makes their final, seemingly irrational choices so incredibly perplexing. Because honestly, the early days of their expedition were completely normal. The group kept these really detailed journals, and they took photos every single day of the trek. They were laughing, building campfires, playing in the snow, just having a totally great time. The visual records they left behind, they show a beautiful, completely routine adventure. Nobody looking through the lenses of those cameras could have possibly guessed they were taking their final photographs.
Section 2. The Final Camp.
The shift from this perfectly routine trip to a total nightmare happens abruptly on February 1st. Let's trace those mundane final hours. Starting in the afternoon, the hikers reach a snowy mountain slope. But instead of hiking down into the tree line where they'd be protected from the weather, they make this deliberate choice in the late afternoon to pitch their tent right there on the exposed, freezing hillside. It was insanely windy and punishingly cold, but they decided to hunker down. Evening sets in and things are still completely normal. They cook dinner, they jot down notes in their journals, and as night falls, they change into their sleeping clothes. Everything is calm, everything is strictly by the book. And then, well, something happened.
Something happened that was so uniquely terrifying, it caused every single person in that tent to do the unthinkable. Years later, when investigators found the tent, they noted this one detail that literally still sends shivers down my spine. The tent wasn't unzipped. It was sliced open from the inside. Just think about the sheer, blind panic it takes to grab a knife and destroy your only shelter from the lethal elements. They actually cut their way out and bolted into the darkness. No boots, no jackets, no supplies. It's a choice that completely defies logic, and honestly, it still confuses investigators today. But here is where the physical evidence takes a really haunting twist. Usually, when you flee in absolute blind terror, you run, right? But the footprints leading away from their camp told a totally different story. The hikers walked. They didn't run. Despite the sheer panic it must have taken to slash open that tent, the tracks in the snow showed they walked away in a remarkably orderly fashion. It's almost as if they were escaping some unseen threat that was forcing them out, but they didn't know exactly what it was. Section 3. The search begins.
So when the group didn't return to civilization on time, rescue teams were eventually sent out. But it actually took weeks before the site was found. And when they finally got there, investigators were met with a truly chilling scene. The tent was remarkably still standing, even though it was completely slashed open from the inside. But all their belongings, their food, and crucially, their heavy winter boots, everything was just left sitting in there. Nothing was stolen, nothing was ransacked. There were just those eerie footprints leading off into the freezing dark. I want you to really ask yourself, what could possibly compel 9 seasoned survivalists to look at their heavy boots, look out at a negative 30-degree night, and decide, yeah, we're safer walking out there in just our socks?
Section 4. The bizarre injuries. As the search party followed those footprints down the mountain, this whole mystery transformed from a strange disappearance into just a completely baffling forensic puzzle. Now, what's really interesting about this is the stark contrast in how these victims were found. First up, beneath a large cedar tree, they find 2 bodies wearing almost zero clothing. The cause of death? Hypothermia. And nearby evidence showed they had actually desperately tried to light a fire. Okay, then, on the path back up toward the tent, they find 3 more bodies, completely frozen solid. Again, hypothermia. It really looked like they realized they made a terrible mistake and were desperately trying to crawl back to camp, but they just didn't make it. If the story stopped there, it would just be a deeply tragic tale of exposure. But months later, buried under deep snow, the remaining 4 hikers are discovered. And their injuries? They are impossible to explain with simple exposure. We're talking broken ribs, crushed skulls. The forensic reports noted something incredibly disturbing. The sheer force required to cause those internal injuries was officially described as being similar to the impact of a major car crash. Yet, bafflingly, there were almost no external wounds, no bruising or scrapes on the skin to suggest they'd been physically beaten. And the anomalies get even more microscopic and, frankly, horrifying. One female victim was found with no tongue. Another hiker was completely missing their eyes. These aren't rumors. These are factual forensic details logged by the medical examiners, and they absolutely blew this case wide open.
Section 5. Theories of the unknown. So how on earth do you explain a situation where highly trained experts cut themselves out of their own tent, casually walk to their deaths in the snow, and suffer injuries like a high-speed collision without a single scratch on their skin? Well, over the last few decades, a ton of theories have popped up to try and fill that void of evidence, and they run the entire spectrum. We've got natural explanations, like a sudden, bizarre avalanche. We have Cold War-era theories, pointing to secret military experiments, parachute mines, or maybe a run-in with escaping prisoners. Then you've got the scientific hypotheses, like powerful winds creating this terrifying infrasound that triggers sudden, uncontrollable panic in the human brain. And, of course, there are those who look straight to the unexplained, suggesting attacks by Yetis or even UFOs. In this explainer, we're just laying out the vast array of ideas that people have been fiercely debating for decades.
And this brilliantly illustrates the gridlock we're currently stuck in today. On one side, we have the most prominent modern conclusion, the avalanche theory. Some recent computer models actually suggest a very specific type of small slab avalanche might have hit the tent, forcing them to flee in terror to avoid being buried alive. It's a very grounded, scientific explanation. But on the flip side, the critics' doubts are extremely persistent. They argue that a small slab avalanche simply doesn't explain everything. It doesn't neatly explain the missing tongue, the missing eyes, or how falling snow could mimic the blunt force trauma of a car crash while leaving the skin perfectly intact. The debate is just completely gridlocked. Today, the Dyatlov Pass remains one of history's most famous, baffling, unsolved mysteries. That frozen mountain has kept its secrets for over 6 decades, and honestly, perhaps it always will. We've laid out the timeline, those baffling footprints, the horrific forensic data, and the warring theories. Now it's really up to you to weigh the evidence. What do you think happened that night? Was it simply the brutal, unforgiving force of nature? A classified military secret gone terribly wrong? Or was it something else entirely? Something we still just cannot explain? Let that sit with you. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep questioning the unknown.